Day 763 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So, starting off, we'll take a look at the Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 439,000 military personnel losses, which represents an additional 780 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, so 10 tanks, 21 APVs, and a whopping 32 artillery, so we're really looking at a double digits day there. And no shortage of examples on this, and I'll show you that shortly in the video. But firstly, we'll move into the Ukrainian map today, into the east, as Russian forces have slightly advanced into the center of Ivaniska, which is on the Bakhmut axis, as geolocated footage showed, with the resulting intense battles taking place within 50 meters of each other. Then moving down momentarily, as although Avdiivka is relatively stable at the moment, Russians are trying to gain control of the remaining fields east of Semenivka. So I have to zoom in right there for that one. So there you go. While just below that, at the west of Orlivka, the Russian forces are trying to break through the defensive lines that run between the ponds. And so far without results, but with big losses and mainly infantry losses. But then also on this axis, we saw the AFU destroy Russian ATGM operator positions at the Avdiivka coke plant. And I must say, in the last little while, we're really starting to see some really high quality recon drone footage by the AFU in terms of high resolution and clarity. And I also dare say in cinematic style, as with this footage. And then we move down to Novomykhailivka, another location with a high degree of activity where the map doesn't indicate it here yet, but there are Russian offensives coming from the south of the town as they look to connect with Russian troops advancing from the east. Though in general, Russian activity has somewhat slowed down in this location on the map, but the activity certainly still remains. Then looking around, so somewhere in the east, Ukrainian soldiers from the 72nd Separate Mechanized Brigade destroyed a Russian T-80 BVM tank in the Donetsk region. And this MBT happens to be one of Russia's most capable. Then, roughly 20 kilometers behind the front lines in Russian-controlled Luhansk territory, a Ukrainian fixed-wing drone conducts a precision strike against a Russian Zytel R330ZH, which is one of their electronic warfare stations. And it was barely a week ago that one of these $10 million systems was taken out in Belgorod as well. Of course, we should also point out the irony that this overpriced system was destroyed by the very weapon it was designed to protect against. Then also, we saw that Ukrainian servicemen have destroyed a Russian Buk missile system using a HIMARS rocket. Then we saw a brave Russian command post bravely intercept a Ukrainian JDAM. But then, as for looking further on the map today, further west to the Orikhiv axis, as Robotina continues to experience fierce combat engagements in this southern sector, which comes at a time when Ukrainian Ground Forces commander Paveluk revealed that Russia is amassing over 100,000 soldiers, potentially signaling a new summer offensive. However, he suggested that the troop buildup might also serve to bolster existing units' combat capabilities. He also acknowledged the challenges in predicting Russia's plans, but also assured that Ukraine is preparing for various scenarios. Then we'll head way up north to Sumy, as Russia just yesterday, the Russian forces launched a barrage of attacks on 8 communities near the northeastern border with Russia. Now, earlier in the day, President Zelensky visited the Sumy Oblast, inspecting the construction of fortifications and visiting the positions of the 117th Separate Territorial Defense Brigade. During the visit, he toured the trenches, dugouts, and fire and command observation posts, receiving a briefing on the project for building a platoon stronghold near Sumy. The stronghold includes reinforced concrete structures, firing positions, and tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, and corrugated steel shelters. Zelensky also met with the brigade at their positions, where commanders reported on the organization of defense along the three border lines, the ratio of forces, equipment, weapons, and the dynamics of Russia's use of their guided aerial munitions. Now, the president's visit comes after criticism in the fall of 2023 regarding the slow progress on fortifying defense lines, prompting the establishment of a working group in November to coordinate fortification efforts. And as you may remember, earlier this month, Zelensky announced that Ukraine was constructing 2,000 kilometers of fortifications across the front lines of Ukraine. Then, as for an update in the Black Sea, so the Ukrainian Navy has reported that Russia has only one warship on combat duty in the Black Sea with no caliber cruise missiles, or indeed the carriers that launch them, spotted in the area. Also advised upon was the Sea of Azov, which remains clear of Russian warships due to, well, it's now considered too close for comfort or just too risky for the Russian Navy. Plus, also advised was that a single Russian caliber cruise missile carrier armed with up to 8 missiles was observed in the Mediterranean Sea. But it's not much use to them there, and Turkey is not allowing Russian warships access through the Turkish-controlled Bosphorus Strait, much to Russia's frustration. Then we'll head across to some news for today, especially as my mouse is super sensitive today, zooming in and out. So, starting off, Ukraine has deployed a network of thousands of smartphones inside of Ukraine to track incoming Russian drones and missiles. So the system uses an app that turns phones into acoustic sensors to detect and identify aerial threats incoming from Russia. The data is then fed into Ukraine's National Air Defense Command and Control Network, which combines input from various sensors to detect, identify, and track enemy weapons. Also, through the use of artificial intelligence, the system differentiates between animal and vehicle sounds and those of drones and missiles. And so then it sends that information back to a central repository via mobile networks. Now, this is just the first generation of the setup, with the next generation system upcoming and aims to deploy over 12,000 sensors, so to speak, mobile phones to Ukraine's border regions and beyond. And so how well is this working so far? Well, since their implementation, mobile firing groups have intercepted nearly 100 Russian Shahed drones, with expectations of even higher success rates using the new and upcoming system, which is all part of a larger inter-networked air defense solution that gives Ukraine an updated and real-time awareness of threat monitoring within its own airspace. Then, in some other news, and in follow-up to a previous hardware pledge, France will very soon be delivering 78 Caesar howitzers to Ukraine, according to the French defense minister. So these are, of course, the 155mm NATO standard self-propelled howitzers, and this incoming delivery is in addition to the 30 Caesars, those artillery systems that France has already delivered to Ukraine as part of earlier shipments. France also plans to deliver 80,000 155mm artillery shells to Ukraine in 2024, which is an amount that doesn't break any records, but when you include larger commitments from the European Union and other countries as part of a multitude of separate bilateral security agreements between Ukraine and other nations, it does all tend to add up. Oh, not to mention that whopping 1.5 million artillery shell allotment incoming from a separate Czech-led initiative. Then moving across to some Russian hardware updates, if you will. So the Russian Ministry of Energy is reportedly planning with the National Guard of Russia, the Rosgvardia, to deploy Pantsir surface-to-air missile batteries to protect infrastructure buildings across Western Russia. Now, these locations, or military targets for Ukraine, which are expected to receive this additional protection, include oil refineries, transfer sites, depots, ports, and several power plants. All of which is not surprising that Russia would consider the planning of defense at such locations, as these facilities have become targets for Ukrainian long-range attack drones in just the recent weeks that we've seen alone, thereby prompting the Russian government to take steps to enhance their defense. Well, they frame it as enhancing, but in most cases, it's a situation of starting from scratch for adding air defenses instead. So, great success right there. Expensive and rare equipment that is otherwise required for use in Russian-occupied Ukraine, which is now being repostured into a defensive stance within Russia itself. Even still, Russia's air defense is simply too large to protect all, or most, or even some of. Then headed across to some other news. So thousands of Hungarians gathered near the parliament in Budapest, which is indicated by the clown emoji right here, demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Viktor Orban following a corruption leak scandal. So these protests were sparked by a former government insider, Peter Magyar, who released a tape allegedly implicating government officials in covering up corruption. So in the leaked tape, it apparently incriminates other officials in tampering with court records to conceal their involvement in corrupt business dealings. Then adding to that, Katalin Se, a Hungarian opposition member of the European Parliament, stated that this is clear evidence of the lack of freedom and independence in the Hungarian justice system, which is certainly something we all felt we knew anyway. Now, Orban, who has been in power since 2010, has faced criticism for democratic backsliding and anti-EU rhetoric. Not to mention, Orban has maintained very warm ties with the Kremlin, and was repeatedly seen to be obstructing aid for Ukraine and sanctions against Russia. Then headed to some economy-related news, as Russia is increasing imports of gasoline from Belarus to prevent potential shortages caused by recent Ukrainian attacks on Russian oil refineries, according to a recent Reuters report. So the disruptions have led Russia, typically a fuel exporter, to purchase supplies from abroad and even ban gasoline exports which happened on the 1st of March this year. But back to the Belarus exports to Russia, it is interesting because I was just speculating exactly about something like this happening just last week. And just take a look at Belarus. Essentially a small country with a population of about 10 million. So would you think they have the oil refining capacity to support Russia's needs, especially to feed Russia's war machine? Absolutely not. Not by a long shot. With their two main oil refineries, they only produce about a 15th of what Russia produces under normal conditions. So this reliance on Belarusian gasoline imports highlights the impact of Ukrainian strikes on Russia's oil industry and the measures being taken by Moscow to try to mitigate their fuel shortages. Not to mention, both countries now have to deal with the expected fallout of unquestionably rising fuel costs for each nation. Demand will outstrip supply. Meanwhile, to add a bit of insult to injury, Russian oil companies are facing significant delays in receiving payments from banks, and not only just from China now, but also in Turkey and the UAE due to increased sanctions compliance. According to several sources familiar with the matter, banks in these countries have tightened their compliance measures, leading to delays of at least several months in processing payments to Moscow. And in some instances, money transfers to Russia have been completely rejected by the banks. So ultimately, these delays, or indeed rejections, are having a negative impact on the Kremlin by reducing and destabilizing its revenues from oil sales. And overall, what a self-inflicted mess Russia has got itself into. Then headed across to a funny to round it all off today, guys. So this one's at least a funny by association. So an Emirates Airbus A380 Super Jumbo suffered significant damage on Wednesday afternoon at a Moscow airport when a ground services truck became wedged underneath the massive double-deck aircraft as it prepared for departure. Yeah, I'm scratching my head on how this could have happened too. It actually looks like it's deliberately rammed right in there. So, photos shared on social media show the bright yellow truck partially crushed under the aircraft, with the belly of the A380 appearing to have sustained substantial damage as the truck was dragged underneath. The cause of the accident has not yet been determined, officially, and it is believed that no one was injured in the incident. Emirates also confirmed the incident in a statement saying that the flight had been cancelled due to a ground services vehicle making contact with the aircraft prior to passengers boarding. And this plane is expected to be grounded for quite some time, potentially indefinitely, due to sanctions on getting parts into the country for the aircraft. However, the hilarity in all of this is the potential scenario that this was a planned grounding of an Airbus plane by Russia, for which Russia still possesses multiple unmaintained Airbus and other Western planes that are still used to this day, and that were never returned to Western leasing companies amid economic sanctions on those planes. So maybe, just maybe, what we're seeing here is Russia's new procurement approach to Western plane parts, where they deliberately crash into them so that they can scavenge for parts. Because they've already been doing this with their existing non-returned Western fleets as it is. Haha, classy Russia. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Thanks again for all the support. Can't thank you enough. Please like and comment if you can, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.